Welcome everyone to Haven of Horror. As always, I am Subject, and I have Robert the Hitcher Wild with us. Uh,
Hello.
we're going to talk about The Hitcher 2.
No, no,
That's what I
not
watched.
that one. Were you
Uh,
confused
I
jumping straight into
was.
Hitcher 2?
I was like, why did he pick this? But if you haven't been able to tell from the background, the thumbnail, or the title, Robert made me watch The Hitcher.
I did.
And we're going to talk about it. We didn't do a commentary for this one. We might do a commentary for my pick. That depends on if Robert says yes, because I'm not going to put my foot down on my pick. But we'll get to that. So, Robert, since this is your pick, tell us about The Hitcher.
The Hitcher. It's a little cult movie from 1986. Yeah, it didn't make a huge splash when it came out. Got absolutely trashed by critics. But over time developed a bit of a cult following. It's a little HBO movie, but did go to theaters. And it's built up a pretty decent reputation over the years, and I think rightfully so. This is a really tense, unique little thriller. This is one of those movies that gets thrown into those debates of does this count as horror or not. I'm curious where you land on that. I definitely see this as more of a thriller, definitely a bit of an action movie, but there's enough horror elements, I think, for it to count. It's the type of movie where the subject matter is horrific. Being in this situation is terrifying. But from an audience perspective, it's definitely thrilling and more of an action type of movie. But I think it strikes that balance really well. And Rucker Hauer plays the titular Hitcher, who is great. This terrifying presence, this guy you don't know anything about. He's just a hitchhiker that C. Thomas Howell's character picks up, and then just who then proceeds to terrify him through and ruin his life over the course of this entire movie. But that's just very few characters, or at least very few main characters we focus on. The meat of the story is just about these two guys. One guy on the run, and the other guy the pursuer, but obviously other characters come to the story as it goes. But I like this movie a lot. I don't remember really knowing what I went in expecting when I watched this a few years ago. It just looked interesting to me. I watched this on Max or HBO Max or whatever it was called a few years ago. It's not currently on there, which is annoying and weird since this was an HBO movie, but I know Sony put it in theaters. But yeah, it's something that really stuck with me, and I've now seen a few times. I like it a lot. It deserves more recognition, I think.
I'd argue this is one step away from just being a slasher movie.
Yeah, there's
So I would
absolutely a
consider
slasher side
this
here.
a horror thriller, and it's in the vein of the Silence of the Lambs,
Hmm.
stuff like that. Not what I was expecting for some reason, because I remember my dad had this on VHS tape, which is how I discovered this film. I just never got around to watching it. I was always under the impression it was going to be like a couple stuck in the car with the
Mm.
hitcher, and the suspense was like, oh, is he going to kill them now? It is not that. Uh,
No.
Not at all, and in a good way, because I think this is more interesting. Um,
Yeah,
all the
that's funny you
performances are
say that.
good. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that's funny you say it because that's kind of what the setup of the remake is. If we ever get around to watching that or covering that on the channel, but the remake, I know which I've not seen for myself, but I know the setup of that is it's a couple we're following, not just one guy who then pick up the hitcher and the rest of the shenanigans happen. But yeah, this is a very focused movie on these two characters. Absolutely.
I really like the lead in this. He's really good at not only being stressed but scared, and like he feels like
Mhm.
a person, not just
Yes.
a character reacting to the script.
Or and not like a character you see in like a slasher movie who's just doing dumb things for the sake of the plot
Mhm.
happening. He
No, that kind of
behaves
falls
somewhat
on the
reasonably.
cops. The cops are kind
Yeah.
of dumb in this movie.
Oh, they are, and a bit incompetent. Obviously, mileage will vary on that. And of course, we never really get to be in their shoes. Like, there's some cops later in the film where clearly they're just motivated by revenge and are
Hmm.
angry and are coming after this guy when they really shouldn't be. But yeah, it's. But Rucker Hauer, man, as John Ryder, the Hitcher, he fucks up a lot of shit over the course of this movie.
Yeah, so not to get too cinema sinsy on it, but the at the end, the big, set piece that everybody knows, they're like, well, we can't shoot him or his foot will come off the clutch and it'll be over. That's the only way you could think of to free her. Like, you can't cut the chains or,
I
free her feet.
I was thinking about that. I wonder if the idea was meant to be like, well, he'll see them coming. Maybe he's looking in the mirror or something, and that they're just I don't know. It's a very tense, quick situation that goes by really quickly. We're not
Mhm.
in that scene for very long. It's just like, oh my god, we're doing this now, and then it does not
This
end
is
well.
not at all a complaint. This is just me being a bloodthirsty bastard. I kind of wish we'd seen it.
Mm. Yeah, I'm curious how much of that was shot and cut, or if it was always intended to be off screen. Because we're jumping around a lot, but this is a good segue into. I know this movie getting made was a bit tough. The script was around for a while. This writer was really passionate about it, but I know at least as far as the script goes, this was a way gorier movie than what
Mhm.
we're actually see here, with a lot more kills and a lot more on-screen kills, like the family early on and the girl getting split in half. So I know in the script a lot of that violence was considerably more graphic. In the studio made them just cut it down relentlessly just to get this thing to an R. But I don't know how much that stuff was actually shot or if it was just known going into filming, okay, we just can't do this gory stuff. And then strange, but I still think though you're not wrong. It would have been interesting to see that kill in particular since it's the big memorable one, to see a bit more gore there. I still think it's very effective just with the sound effects and
I will
the
say I was
infliction.
actually sad at what happened, and I don't have that a
It's
lot of times
cruel.
in movies.
It's it's the type of scene that definitely turns some people off from this movie and is kind of the make or break moment if you're still with it or not. But I think the movie earns it. It's just it is very cruel and very sad, how that
No,
goes
but
on
we've
because it's
talked
a
about it. I
character we really
love that
doesn't
shit
deserve.
in movies.
Yeah. Well, so as to why I picked this movie, why I thought you might like it, I just felt like there's a lot of stuff in here. Now that we've been doing this for a year, and I kind of have a good more sense of your sensibilities,
God, has
there's
it
a
been a
lot in this
year?
movie. Yeah, dude.
Jesus.
um, like oh, I'm so old. Um, there's just a lot in this pieces to this movie. I thought, oh, you'd probably like this with the action, with the dark. And this movie didn't have say a bad ending, which I know you like in your horror, but it's not a happy ending either. Like it ends on a
This is
very
not a
somber note.
happy ending.
Right.
It reminded me the ending because one of the things, and you're right, there was a lot in this movie I liked, and I think this would have been one of my favorite films if I'd watched it
Mm.
when I was younger. I still did like it quite a bit, and we'll get into obviously ratings and everything later. But one of the things that I couldn't help but while watching this is like, oh, so this is where this movie got this idea from, because I don't know if you have this, but the scene where they arrest him, that is just that there is nothing but knives and lint in his pocket.
Yes, it
Scene from The
is.
Dark Knight.
That is absolutely true. Christopher Nolan was a big fan of this movie and has actually talked about that this was kind of a big inspiration for his take on the Joker. And he liked Rutger Hauer's performance a lot, and that's why Rutger Hauer is in Batman Begins as the Wayne
Okay.
Enterprise guy. So that is not like a fan theory. Oh, maybe like no, Nolan has on record said like, no, I'm a fan of this movie, and this was
Um,
very influential. And you can totally see that with this killer with no backstory, no origin, no clear motivation. He is just a force
can't
of
be
nature.
bargained with. He can't be
Yep.
reasoned. Um,
Yep.
and then the ending is very Seven.
Yeah.
And
It's like,
then
well, they
this
killed
is
the
a more an
killer.
unfortunate comparison. I couldn't stop thinking of that. You remember that shitty Russell Crowe movie from a couple years ago,
Oh,
where he's like an
the
angry
road
driver?
rage thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I never
that
watched
movie
it.
had to be looking at this because it's the
That's
same
funny.
thing. Just
Maybe.
a guy picks somebody and makes their life miserable for an hour
Mhm.
and a half, and it's over vehicles.
Yeah, for sure. But Rucker Hauer is so interesting in this movie because he doesn't get like a ton of dialogue. You don't get
No, but he
long
has
speeches or
presence.
anything. Yeah, he's just a presence. And I really love what he brings to this role. What I really like about his performance is there's kind of there's a weird somberness to it. there are a lot of scenes where he conveys like he enjoys what he's doing. So he's not like the Joker in that way. He's not laughing all the time. Like what I love about the setup in this movie with him and Thomas Howell in the car when he's first threatening in his life and starting to act creepy, he says, "I want you to stop me." That's kind of the driving engine of this whole thing. It's a challenge he puts on our main character of I want you to stop me. And can you do it? Like he's testing this guy
I want
this
you to
whole
hit
thing.
me,
And
dude.
the
I want you to
dynamics
hit me.
yep, it's just that scene. It's really interesting.
Um, no, and oh, the other thing is there's a movie called Midnight Meat Train. I don't know if you've seen it,
That one
but
I've not seen.
that has kind of a similar setup with just a protagonist without motive or anything. Now, and later in the movie, he do find his motive, but the end of that movie, slight spoilers, but I'll keep it vague, is the protagonist replaces the antagonist, and for a brief second, when the kid, I don't remember his name, but when the kid turns on the sheriff who is from The Walking Dead,
Hmm.
um, I was like, oh shit, like is he gonna become the next like Hitcher? And it doesn't go that way, and I think that's ultimately for the better. But that would have been interesting.
It's interesting to say that though, because that is an interpretation some people have with the ending we got after everything's kind of settled and done. It's just him alone. That is a way some people do read this of like, oh, maybe he is the next Hitcher,
Yeah, but they
and
made a
maybe
sequel.
he's
We know
lost his
that's
mind.
not true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's for another time. I don't know, and I could be mistaken on this. I want to say at some point, maybe in the script or somewhere, the final shot was actually him, maybe like holding his thumb out, you know, after the final battle. Just kind of a more direct visual thing of maybe he's the next Hitcher, but who knows? I like the ambiguity of this movie. You can interpret it in many different ways, and I like
No,
that
it's kind
about
of a
it.
perfect ending.
But what I like too that makes it kind of stand out more than your typical slasher film, or I'd say your average Final Girl. Not every Final Girl, because there's plenty of great ones, but in that this is also kind of an adventure film. It's just a really dark one, but it's a genuine coming of age story. This is a young guy at the start who's trying to move states, restart his life, get a bit of excitement. Is the vibe you get, and he gets more than he bargained for. But it's a real, honest to god, like coming of age story, and you can look at the final climax in one of two ways: either like, oh, this is so dark and cynical of this guy giving in to his darkness and his violent nature, or when he confronts the sheriff and steals the car, you could also just as easily read that as, no, this is my responsibility. Like, it's him stepping up. I have to finish this. I love that you can read it either way.
Yeah, no, I like the kind of ambiguity, which is interesting because I normally hate that shit. But
Mhm.
it works because we at least get a satisfying conclusion to the protagonist and the Hitcher story.
Right. The plot isn't ambiguous if you're just looking at it from a this is how we get from point A to point B. Like, it is, there's nothing unclear. Like, it is satisfying in that way. It's more just the motivations and themes are what they leave up to you, like what you take from it.
About power.
Yeah.
The girl in this, I don't know her name either, but she's really good. Um,
Yeah.
she kind of gets sucked into this whole thing, and it has that kind of. It also has a bit of that like superhero thing of like, I need help and I have to drag you into this, but like something could happen to you, and then lo and behold, it does.
Yeah.
Which I think goes back to what you said is you could read this as he becomes the next Hitcher because like he's devastated that he got her killed.
Hmm. Like maybe he's lost the rest of his humanity or snapped. But yeah, their rivalry's just so interesting. The way and the Hitcher's motivations of just is he, because obviously at least early on, he's trying to frame our protagonist for these murders, but it's definitely a lot deeper than that. There is this weird creepy kind of respect that builds between the two of them. Like, because the Hitcher, as we see, like he could kill him anytime if he really wanted to, but he doesn't. Like he's having too much, interest. There's so much intrigue that's intriguing here about just pushing this guy to his limits. That's where you get a lot of that kind of Batman Joker feeling to it of he is pushing this guy to his absolute limits and trying to make him
Why this guy?
more
I
than
don't know.
just missing. I don't know. He's in
He
the
just
right
felt
place at
like
the
it.
right time. Yeah,
Wrong
he just
place,
felt
wrong
like it.
time.
Yeah, maybe he sees a bit of himself in our protagonist. We're not sure, but I love their exchange early on though, where like I mean that very day though, the Hitcher had already been picked up by another dude whose car they drive past, and we don't see this at all. He just tells him, "Oh yeah, I cut off that guy's arms and legs and then his head," so he probably didn't get very far. It's a very Joker type line on paper. You're just like, "Oh my god." So this is not. So he's been doing this for God knows how long. Just being a hitchhiker. This is why you don't pick up hitchhikers because the movies like this.
Exactly. So for what you were saying, this movie is made for about 8 million, which seems insane for the time.
Yeah, that's
Um,
that's not low by any means.
and it only made like 5.8 million. And this is directed by Robert Harmon and written by Eric Reed. Um,
Yeah, who I think made a wonderful film here, but just didn't get a big career after this. They made a few things. The writer the following year did write Near Dark, which is a vampire movie I like a lot. That is very similar
oh, okay, yeah, I
tone,
see that here.
gritty tone to it.
So now
Very
I'm
similar vibe.
interested. Now I'm curious because Wikipedia also lists him as the writer for the remake. So that makes me wonder if there's enough of that script in there that they had to credit him.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know. I don't know if that's a good question. I don't know how directly involved he was, or if it's like, ah, well, we're using most of the script. We legally have to. I don't know.
um, and then yeah, he didn't do a whole lot. At least nothing that I've heard of. Like, what the fuck is Blue Steel?
I don't know. And the director I know did just a lot of like made for TV work. And this movie's interesting because I don't know how many of these there even are there, but this was not a made for TV movie like you may assume it was, being an HBO film. I guess in the 80s they were just trying to be like a studio, and I know they had Sony distribute it, so this was theatrical, but I don't know how many HBO movies I've seen besides this. Not counting like the modern streaming Max era. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, no. When you told me that, because I thought this was just like a theatrical film. I had no idea this was made for HBO, and then they're like, yeah, we'll put it in the theaters because that couldn't have been common in the 80s.
I don't think so, not to my knowledge. And it's funny because this is rated R, but was still there was still a lot of studio pressure to tone down the violence. And I know the big death with Jennifer Jason Lee, that was a big point of contention where the writer really had to fight for it. Where he's like, it just changes the whole third act if you don't do that. Like it's just not the same ending without that. And like I said, it's cruel, it's very dark, but it is a big memorable moment. And it's like, yeah, we're making a dark movie. I don't. It's a weird situation, but for a movie that was so panned by critics for being so nihilistic and gory and mean
Which is
spirited,
hysterical when you
I
take
find
into
that
consideration
strange.
the 80s. This isn't
Right.
even the
And
most cynical thing I've seen from the 80s.
no, and I guess that's just a product of just when this came out, because this is 86, so this is kind of post the whole slasher craze, and this is when those are getting toned down or edited a lot. So it's just I feel like this movie would have looked very different, for better or worse. I think this movie looks very different if it's made in 1980 uh, or 90. Just right when it gets made, it's just in this weird spot.
It's crazy we made a like decades later sequel.
Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, it was less than 20 years later, but and that was a made for TV or a straight to DVD movie. Just I guess just to capitalize on this doing well on home video and becoming a bit of a cult thing. Like, yeah, well, let's make a sequel to that, I guess. And then just a few years later, gets a big studio remake, and then that doesn't do very well. But yeah, it's one of those movies. Weird. So it's like this weird franchise now. But all
It
people
is.
really
There's
remember or
three
talk about is
movies.
this one. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know.
like because I remember I was really in tune with like the Platinum Dunes remakes at the time. This
Hmm,
one completely missed me by. It's the only one I don't think I've seen.
interesting. And I've never watched it for myself either, so that'll
I
be
want I
interesting to
want to see
revisit.
it for Sean Bean.
Sean Bean's cool. I was I mentioned Near Dark earlier, which Henriksen is in, and I think he would have been a good choice for this role. I like Terrence Stamp and some other actors they were looking at. But I'm very happy with Rutger Hauer. I, this favorite performance of his that I've seen. Uh, he's not.
This is a situation where I fell so much in love with his performance. I can't see anybody else in this role, or at least in this version. I
Mhm,
could see it be recast for a remake, which is why I'm curious about Sean Bean because I think he could be cool. Um,
mhm.
but no, I think they went with the right choice.
Yeah, and he has that unassuming look to him, where just at first glance he is just kind of a normal looking guy. But in his performance, he just has these dead, cold eyes, and very quickly you're like, "Oh no, this guy's bad news." That's part of what I love about the setup too. Is this movie wastes no time? You are just in that car with these two, and it's extremely tense.
Yeah,
And then once he's out of the car, like the chase really begins, which is why we compared it to Terminator ever or earlier, because that plot's very different, but it has that similar
yeah.
feel of this pursuit, this nonstop chase, with a lot of action and shooting and explosions and stuff.
So many vistas.
So many. Oh my god, they wrecked so many cars in this movie.
They do. I want to. Maybe that's where all the budget went. Robert.
Yeah. That helicopter stunt's pretty cool. They got a helicopter to shoot with. That's fun.
Yeah, and I will say, really well shot action, which isn't
Yeah.
a given when this movie. Even though there's action, obviously the horror and suspense is at the forefront.
hmm Absolutely. And watching this again, part of what's impressive, this isn't anything mind blowing. It's not like a big epic Jim Cameron movie or something. It's not anything you haven't seen before, but there's not any like rear projection or weird blue screen. I didn't notice any effects that looked off to me or fake. The whole movie looks very real and just on location in camera. That adds a lot to the flavor of it. There's nothing that's artificial that stands out about
Are
it.
you ready for the green screen and bad CGI remake?
Oh.
um, and the other thing that's impressive because a lot of the times in a situation like this, it can really feel like a one-sided like, oh, this killer is just like unstoppable. And I have that in a couple of places. Like somehow he wipes out an entire police station off screen, and the
Mhm.
protagonist has no idea. But it really does feel almost like they're equals. Did you have that?
Yeah, and at least with the station, it's they do go out of their way to show that it's only three or four guys there. Because we're just in the middle of nowhere. But I think it strikes that right balance, at least for me, because the big kind of criticism of this movie or why people can't get into it, besides the tone, is for some people are like they say, "Oh, well, this is way too implausible. This is way too unrealistic." And to me, that's just not really seeing the forest through the trees. It's like
I
this
hate that
character
complaint.
yeah, this character John Ryder, like, yes, it's not literally a supernatural movie, but he's a force of nature, and I think that works. And that's the point. He can be anything. He's the devil. He's this unstoppable monster, but he still has enough humanity to him and takes enough damage that it never takes me out of the movie too much. And then, of course, he is defeated at the end, or is he? So I don't know. It strikes that balance for me, where yeah, this guy, I don't know, he gets really lucky. He's able to do all these crazy things, but you're always in the protagonist's shoes, and I
You could
think
have
it
a
works.
protagonist that was smart, but not invincible. Like he gets hurt, he makes mistakes,
Oh yeah.
he arguably loses at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I
And like I
liked.
said, John Ryder, I think again, it's so creepy and weird, but I think his respect for this guy does grow throughout the movie. Like he is fucking with him deliberately.
Yes, because in the truck scene, he's almost disappointed when he won't pull the trigger,
Yeah.
and then he lets go of the clutch.
hmm
But if I'm okay, so I have a question about that. So if I'm going to understand, if they shoot this guy, his foot will move off the brake or the clutch, and then the truck will go.
hmm
But then if he doesn't shoot the guy, so he doesn't shoot him, then he just lets go of the clutch anyway. So it was kind of a Joker, like there is no way to win this scenario.
Right. I at least think that's what they're going for. And from a protagonist's perspective, I think he's just too scared in that moment. He just doesn't have it in him yet to really take action. Which then at the end, of course, he finally does. But yeah, there's definitely a degree of he wants him to do something, and it is a very Joker like, well, I want to die, but I want to die on my terms. I want to die doing something horrible, to make some final point. Um, yeah, it's just this twisted interplay these two have, and like the scene in the diner when he's taunting him because he's like, "That bullet doesn't have guns. Come on," or that bullet, that gun doesn't have
Really,
bullets.
those
There we go.
bullets don't have guns. Okay.
Yeah, that's one way of phrasing it.
Okay,
But no,
so
that's a great scene.
another thing, because I'm glad you mentioned the diner. Where did the where did the finger come from at the diner, the first diner scene?
So, trying to think of when he would have planted the knife on him. Probably in that first exchange. My read on that scene is always um that Ryder's already there. He's just lurking somewhere in the background. And they do make a point of showing you though that the hamburger and fries, like she does leave them on the thing, leaves, and our protagonist is still in the bathroom like cleaning himself and changing, so there is a shot there of just the food by itself, so the implication is sometime between the cuts, like Ryder comes in, drops the finger in, and leaves. So my read on that scene is like, oh, he is there the whole time, he's just lurking somewhere in the background.
Okay.
But that finger gag is great. That got me on first viewing, and it's so well done, just with him chewing on the fries, and then he picks up the finger, and you're like, "Oh Jesus,
He's gonna eat it. No,
don't do
that
that."
is definitely a scene I think will work on this better on a second time because I hadn't fully adjusted, I think, to the rules of this universe. Because I was like,
Mhm.
oh, that guy is way back, wherever he still left him. It's going to take him time to get here. Nope, in this universe, he's there. It's fine.
Yeah, it's certainly improbable, but never goes too far for me. And there are other scenes later on, like when our protagonist gets on the bus, and you get that established shot of the bus leaving, and way in the background, you do see the truck come out and pursue them. So you do get little moments like that of like, okay, he is still pursuing them, like he's paying attention to what he's doing. And I know, back to the scene with the finger, that was one thing that was changed because in the script there's going to be like an eyeball in his
Ooh.
hamburger, and it's going to be this really gross moment, which sounds effective, but this is a case where the censored, toned down version of that, of just a severed finger, I think actually works better. It's just such a good sight gag with going from the fries
It's a better
to the
gag,
finger.
and like, yeah, I don't know if I want to see an eyeball. So I assume he would have
Yeah.
bitten into it.
Probably.
It's just like a sunny side up egg.
Ugh, ugh. Yeah, and that finger, I presume, was probably just from that family he killed and just kept on him. And that's a scene I know was cut down a lot from the script because in the movie it's entirely off screen. But I still think a great sequence of just see this family in this Volkswagen going by, and oh my god, he's in the back seat with this child, and he
I
fucking
love that
kills
he
all of
starts
them.
screaming at them like a lunatic.
Yep,
Ah!
and they're like, "What?"
Um,
It's so sad.
the tricky thing with this, Robert, is that it's such a simple film that I'm kind
Mhm.
of running out of things to say. But we've been at this for half an hour, so I want to ask: is there anything else that you feel like we should talk about before we move into final thoughts?
I love, like you said, I love the simplicity to it, and the performances are so good. C. Thomas Howell, man, like he has such a strange career. He was kind of a big up and comer in the '80s. He was in lots of stuff, and then something happens, and he's just not in as much stuff anymore. He's the type of guy who mostly has like TV credits now. But I always like him and stuff. He's a very good actor, and this film, I think he's perfect as this young guy going through. I think he completely sells it.
Yeah. Um, and this movie has that timeless quality.
Mhm,
You were talking about the censors, and we were both big Friday the 13th fans. This never gets
mhm.
to a Friday the 13th of like, oh, this is like overly. cut down. Like I feel like there's something missing. Or what was that movie we watched, My Bloody Valentine, where it's like you have to watch this specially restored
Yeah.
edition, or it's kind of a shitty like slasher. No, this never feels watered down.
No, I don't think so. And then it's just weird when you see the response to it. Like I know one critic said, "Oh, all this movie is just how many ways you could take apart a human body," and you're like,
I
"What? That's not." A, that stuff never happens on screen. But aside from one description and like the one big kill in the movie, everything else just gets shot. Like it's stuff you've seen before. There isn't much violence in this that you haven't seen in something else. Like that's not
yeah
really the selling point. Again, it's meant to be shocking. Like it's meant to be dark and disturb. But like you said, in that Seven kind of way, it's not trying to necessarily top anything or be overly gratuitous or whatever. It's just trying to get under your skin and be an experience. Like it's just trying to be disturbing, and I think it succeeds. And
yeah.
I like, um, and also earlier we were talking about like the director and writer who aren't known for a lot of else. Same with this composer, Mark Isham. Mark Isham, however you pronounce that. Not very familiar with his work outside of this movie, but I think the score is great. It in the first 5 minutes, it just establishes this really somber tone, which is the thing that's always stuck with me with this movie and resonated with me. Like there is some really fun, exciting action and scary stuff, but right off the bat, like, oh, this is a very somber, sad tone that kind of comes back at the very end. And like you said, nobody really wins. Um, it,
He's done some bigger movies lately. He did your favorite movie, Robert,
oh no.
The Conjuring.
Well, guess there's probably worse. I guess he could
Uh,
have been worse.
but he did The
Uh,
Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent.
oh, okay,
Bill
that's
and
interesting.
Ted. Bill and Ted Face the Music.
Well, he's still working.
Yeah,
But
he did
one
Time
one thing I
Cop.
want. Oh, there you go. One thing I wanted to point out with the music though is some of the score, mainly at the end, after the action's done and the credits roll, and it's like that very sad music. A bit of that appears in Stranger Things season 4. I will point it out to you
Huh?
when we get to that scene. But there's one scene of that show where I was like, I've heard this music before. Where have I heard this? And then I finally figured it out. That show's done that a few times though. They've pulled like scores and little bits from different things, which I'm not really opposed to, because especially since this movie's not very well known. But now there is a new beautiful 4K out there, both a deluxe collector's edition that's like $90 if you can get your hands on it. But there's also a standard 4K too that I think is the same transfer and a Blu-ray. So I'm definitely gonna be keeping an eye out for those. I'm curious if it's streaming anywhere with that
It's not.
restored cut yet, or if it's just the.
Oh well, I mean, I don't know if it's like on rent. So what do you have there? Just a base, like an old DVD?
This is an old DVD. So like I said, I'd seen this movie on like HBO Max or something a few years ago, and then at a thrift store one time, I found this for $1.
That is the
And I
most
said,
like
"What?"
early 2000s
Yeah,
DVD
dude. And
cover.
for a while, this is the best. And I to be clear, I got this well before the new restoration came out, so this was the best you could probably do because this is one of those movies that was just not available or in print for many years. But yeah, just this very old,
Yeah,
cheap DVD.
I
Kind of
hated
nice.
those.
Yeah, I've got a few, but
That's
I
how
will
I
say,
had Scooby Doo and the Witch's Ghost, I
yeah, was this just a Warner Brothers thing? I feel like all of these types of cases I have are all Warner Brothers
believe.
things.
Maybe.
Could be wrong.
Is that a Warner Brothers release?
Well, at some point they acquire HBO. I just don't know when that
Oh, that's
happens.
right. That's right.
Because they have HBO now, but I don't know if they did then. But yeah, like I said, this is the best two for a long time. This was, and part of its cult status though was just like, yeah, this movie just wasn't super easy to find for a while, before
Mm,
streaming and stuff like that. I know on VHS, like this was a popular rental and how it kind of built up a bit its following. But yeah, I still need to pick it up, but I'm glad there is a new proper restoration that people are saying is great and are talking about. I think it's Second Sight or something that
yeah.
put it out. So Whether I'm able to get my hands on the deluxe or just the standard 4K, very much looking forward to that because I like this movie a lot.
Yeah.
It's very unique.
I'm going to give my final thoughts, and then you can say anything else that you want to and move on to final thoughts. This is great. This subverted my expectations in a satisfying way. I think this is better than what I would have had in my head because it was just like, them like stuck in a car that may not have been as interesting after a while. But this movie always manages to, feel exciting and interesting and fresh. Pacing is amazing. It never
Mhm.
drags, which I can't be said for everything. Um, yeah, this was fun. Nice little surprise.
Yeah, and again, it just stands out where it's not somebody getting chased through the woods. It's a very different vibe. It's somebody in a desert, in the middle of nowhere, and it's a real odyssey for this character. It's like every this whole world's just out to get him for some reason. But I think it's wonderful. Again, just performances are great. I love the vibe. I love the tone. Again, it's just this weird mix of this somber vibe, but also really high stakes action in some places, and it gives you everything you want. Like you said, it has a slasher type character and setup, but it's not a movie about the kills. That's not what you watch this for. If you're looking for a Jason type movie, that's not what this is. It's a lot more psychological than that. But it's not. But not in a boring or artsy way either.
Yeah.
It's still an exciting movie. But yeah, I'd highly recommend it.
I don't remember if we did scores on the Saw 2 one, which is the last review of these we did. But I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5.
Cool. I will go 4.5 out of 5.
Damn,
Why not?
son.
I
All
like this
right.
movie a lot. I think it's great.
All right, Robert, are you ready to hear my insane pick for next time?
Oh no. Go for it.
And this would probably be a commentary. My pick is the 1994 miniseries, The Stand.
Oh god. Oh boy. And you'd rather do that as a commentary than a
Yeah,
review?
because that's going to, I think that would be easier.
Okay, okay. Do you want that to be a blind watch, or should I watch that ahead of time? I feel like I'd rather watch that ahead of time
If
as
you
your
can
blind
watch it
watch.
ahead of a time, because it is long, and it is on YouTube. I'll send you the link later.
Okay.
If you can watch it ahead of time, that would probably be a better idea because that is very it's it's dense. There's so much going on. Um, but that is my pick for 2 weeks from today, or whenever we do that next.
Okay. I can strap in.
Hell yeah!
Go for it. Glad it's on you.
It'll give me a
It'll be
chance to
interesting.
finally watch that Blu-ray that I bought a couple years ago.
That's
Because
what
I
it's all
watched
about.
that back in the day on VHS, and it was 4 VHS tapes. All
That's
right. If
amazing.
you're watching this live, we're gonna take about a 10-minute break. This didn't go as long as I wanted. Nothing wrong with that, though. I think this was a good discussion. And then we're going to do the first 5 episodes. I don't know why I did this when I meant to do this. First 5 episodes of Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 2. We'll see you then, folks.